Lots to do this evening. I'm ready now to put some glazes on here. Hope you'll enjoy this. Just before we begin, this canvas had a few days to dry, and I've done an operation called oiling out, which means rubbing thin oil over the surface, rather like polishing your shoes. What that does is it lifts all of the sunk colour. So as your paints dry, particularly the darker colours in oils, they're still there, but they tend to sink and lose some of their lustre. So we oil it out. That helps us to judge the glazes. And we are really in close tonight. You'll see all of the nitty-gritty, I hope. I'm going to move the painting around, depending on which bit I'd like you to observe as we go. And it's all ready. So that isn't drippy and oily, it's just nicely polished on. I've got fairly small brushes here, and let's get going. Here are the glazes. I'm using liquid mixed with a bit of linseed oil and some white spirit. Right, take a look at this now. We're going to put some shadows on. Imagine that leaf. As the paint's dry, we can freely apply glazes over the various forms on the forest floor. Already that throws that leaf out. Another glaze in here. This is raw umber. Sorry you can't see the palette, but it's some rather close operations tonight with this. You can see up here, yeah, I can actually see the screen, it's in so close. I've got to do my David Attenborough impression. We're in the woods. Close up. And if we keep really quiet, my voice won't boom down the microphone. Here we are. Look at that. Gives an impression of the light catching on the surfaces and throwing shadows underneath. Here and there a little bit warmer. This is the umber with some burnt sienna. See how that just enlivens the depth. Similarly, it enriches the colour, so we might want to throw some stronger colour in. It's important to realise that the glaze does nothing to take away the previous layer. All of the detail is intact, it's just modified and enriched. These sticks and all of the leaf mould, the forest floor. Here's a little device often used, is to throw some shadow across the corners. I noticed even on some of the modern computing programs, you have a vignetting tool which does the same job. Artists were doing it centuries ago. But artists have been involved in the internet revolution, so they can explain all these wonderful things to computer programmers. Already that section is really coming up. Now the next thing we'll do this evening is to get some colour on. So this is the local colour now coming on with these glazes. The glaze is transparent, but to varying degrees. The yellows are less transparent, but it's still going on thinly, so it allows a delicacy of application because of that very pale underlying colour. It throws up the luminosity of that yellow. this colour I'm using, you could use cadmium yellow for this, but I have actually mixed a little bit of white. With that. But the colour I'm actually using is Indian yellow, which mixed with white produces just the right accent, I think, for the primrose. Colours have a fantastic history. It's a history of specialist interest history of art. And Indian yellow, it is now a synthetic colour, but it used to be made from cow's urine, cows that had been fed in India on mango leaves. And it produced this intense yellow when the urine was processed. Some fantastic stories. The history of the colour indigo is full of murder and mayhem, wars and empires, because they never had blue apart from lapis lazuli until fairly recent times. See, I'm putting in the core, the hearts of those primrose. I can add a little bit of umber to that to dull it down. See what you think of this. To darken the yellow, I can send this flower head back into shadow a little bit by increasing the depth of tone with umber. And it throws the focus more onto the flower heads towards the centre. Now some more glazes up here. Let's get some colour on. I'm going to throw some glazes over the plants. I'm imagining here a ray of sunlight and shadow raking across the heart's tongue fern. See how that enlivens the sense of light and shade. And then a rather lighter glaze. This is like a sap green. It has a little bit of cadmium yellow in it to glaze some of the detail on there. Now I've got my cup of tea tonight, and look who's back in town. He wasn't too keen on being roughed up in the dishwasher last week, but I hear tell some of you are on something stronger already. You've got the wine going, and why not? You can sit back and relax while I sweat at the easel. See those glazes enriching the form. This leaf as it curves over, and here going back into shadow. Look at the yellow in that glaze, enhancing the sunlight. This one here, sitting back, I'm looking round the subject thinking, well, what's going to catch the light and what's going to go back into shadow? Mine's a glass of beer later on. And sometimes a surreptitious nip of Johnny Walker Black before bedtime. This is now highlighting back to the opaque colour just as that leaf curves over. You can imagine the sunlight striking on that glossy surface. Actually, the reverse side of the heart's tongue is more furry. The front has a lovely sheen. But I can imagine these backs really flicking the light back into the eye. Just a very cool here, very cool highlight. Imagine the sunlight just twinkling off there. Right, now we need some form here. We're going to paint the bluebells shortly, but I thought you'd just like to see some of this close action. So these big leaves of the primrose, see how the glaze will give a sense of them sitting back into shadow as they go into the core of the plant. And the glazes can be used to build up some of the detailed form. See, that's a dark green glaze. It's important to realise all of these colours are transparent. They wouldn't show up at all if I painted them over the moss. They're only showing up because of the light colour on the leaf that's already dry. They have well, you know what they look like, I'm sure. They have a central vein. They have a sort of bubbling texture in the leaves as well. But one thing I thought I'd demonstrate here, we'll just get some more shade on that leaf, is a little bit of trickery. I know this does get a bit Tommy Cooper sometimes, but I'd like to show you something now which you might enjoy. I have these little brushes once the glazes are on to push them around and soften them. We can lift some of that back as well. We can lift back, clean some of the glaze off because we have a dry surface. So if we look in here, I'll get a slightly smaller brush. If we paint, I'm going to paint a dewdrop. Little trick I think you'll enjoy. I hope it will show up. I think it will pick up this. Very easy to do. All you have to do is analyse what happens. So I was out in the garden a couple of mornings ago making sure I got this right, but I've painted them many times. An easy way is to begin with let's have a glistening dewdrop on the end of this leaf. Begin with an oval, pitched in a darker tone. I'll make it rather luxurious dewdrop so it shows up. Pitched in a darker tone, and then the droplet acts like a lens. So it focuses the green on the light's coming this way, it focuses the green. See that hand shaking there? Just a bit uncomfortable with the camera. Get this right. Just dabbing a spot of green on the reverse side away from the light. So the shadow side is towards the light because it's see-through. It refracts the light and you get this reversal of the norm. And then we can really shine up the inside of that because the lens effect of that curving moisture will focus the light. And you see the little sliver of dark that's left becomes a shadow cast by the droplet on the leaf. And the crowning glory is then we take some of the sunlight colour, which is this, I've got a very pale white with a little bit of Naples yellow. And we just ding a little highlight. The highlight goes on the shoulder of the droplet. Just here. Light's coming that way, on the dark, right over the dark. There's your little droplet of water. Even with that shaky hand, because of the, I'm stretching over a bit to get there. That was a trick. Well, all of these little fool the eye tricks were developed by the Dutch masters. They became very proficient at magical effects in paint, and dewdrops were a speciality. And they were the great flower painters, centipedes and the like, just to really to impress their clients. Right, let's see if we move this over a little bit. I'm going to take a look at the bluebells now. Right, here we go. Yes, you can see that. I can see there. So they're underpainted with a rather anemic blue. Now I have all these lovely colours mixed up. Right, the colour for bluebells, well, it could be any colour. I know what you're thinking. Well, no, they're a specific colour, but when you're painting, it depends what the light's doing. See, I'm using the maul stick. That's what that stick's for. It steadies the hand as you see there. It can work anywhere on the painting. So the light's coming from the left, and the blue can be any colour. If the bluebells are in sunlight, they can become very pale. They can even look, you'd be surprised, they could look yellow in the highlights. But generally, the bluebell, ultramarine is a good base colour, but I combine it with the lovely cobalt violet. It's nothing like cobalt violet, particularly in the lighter areas. Cobalt violet with ultramarine and a little bit of white. So now you'll see that the glaze means that we can get the full strength colour on. You can't match the lustre of a glaze for colour, if you get it right. We can explain that the light's coming from the left. The glaze can suggest detail. Because of the rich, dark mosses and those cavernous spaces between the roots, even darkening the colour means that the bluebells still register. And you can spend some time enjoying painting the details on. The glaze can be brushed on with a streak at close range, which, if you look very closely at the petals, and we are in very close here, at the bluebell flower heads, you see they have, if they're pointing towards you, they have an interior. Sometimes see the anthers. But the blue going on gives those little ribs and streaks of blue that you see at close range. A fluted form. Have some more cobalt violet here. You see the cobalt violet. It blends beautifully with the ultramarine. One technique I like to use is to apply the glaze quite thickly. You know, when we say blue, we mean blue. And then, because you have that dry insurance layer underneath, you can I use these little stiff, short, bristled brushes to lift some of the glaze back on a small scale. So I would lift this blue back on the left side towards the light. So that's applying the glazes to the bluebells. See the brush scrubbing the glazes onto the dry paint. Let's glaze some green over the stems. Look at this curving stem. If we just green it up a little bit. And up here. Do you notice this one now rises to an apex? An important design element, this. And this will help it to register against the backdrop. If you're a painter and you're fairly new to it, you need to learn this, what I'm doing here. This is called counterchange. And it makes a world of difference if you understand how to use it. Counter change is setting important elements in your painting off against their surroundings. So here you see the light tones are set off by those dark mosses. And as this plant rises, you see I've painted like a splash of misty light, very delicate pale light. The counter change element there is in the dark tones. So you see how the counter change throws that bluebell plant right into the foreground. There's no question it looks so three-dimensional if you can make the counter change work. But you don't do it everywhere. I'm trying to draw the eye to this apex, this pinnacle. It's a design that I've used. It's a fairly common design in paintings, the pyramid design. I'll just talk a little bit about that before we finish. You see, this is the apex. Nearly smudged all the work there. And we finish with just a little ding of highlight on that curving. You see the curving stem? Sometimes these are blue. Just a little highlight dinging out there. Where the sunlight just flicks on the edge. Now, back to the stems. Look at this. I talked last week about this leaf, bluebell leaf, coming towards us. So I'm now going to glaze it into life. The first glaze is a warm green on that recurving area there. I'm using the Indian yellow again with the sap green. And there'll be some more of these. It's the warmer colour tends to be in the stems and in the leaves when you see them from the underside. The cooler colour tends to be on the upward side of the leaves. And it's a beautiful element in bluebell painting. If you can achieve these colour changes, get the colour just so. You see, I'm glazing the bluebells into their core root base. They're all gravitating towards this point here. So the glazes are going into the darker areas where the light doesn't reach so easily, as the leaves concertina and compress together. And up above, a cooler glaze. I've decided not to shout out every colour mix. I'll probably post a little bit of guidance for people that might like to give something like this a go for your colours. But you see, that's a cooler green now. And I'm glazing it into its final colour. And this is, I love to do this on these stems. They're glossy and they have a central groove. They have a groove. I'm in the happy position of being able to make them up, having painted them several thousand times. But I said before, you might like to get out into the woods and take some reference photographs or do some sketching. Now look at that curve there. Just on this point here, it's facing the light. There'll be a point of maximum reflection, and it's there. And if I put that on and then blend it into the leaf, this isn't a glaze, this is opaque. You see how that conveys the feeling of the leaf having a waxy sheen. And then we glaze the others behind a bit darker, counter-changing again. And it brings all of this area up to life. I'm mates with Helen Wall, who's soon to be Borough Mayor, I believe. And we swap notes about shared interests. Last year, Helen gave me a great tip-off. Look at this. I took this photograph of a bee orchid. And in this time of lockdown, I didn't have to go very far, and we'll be able to see them again in June. It's Aldi Car Park on Rysedale Road. Can you believe it? A fantastic spread of wildflowers. I hope they don't mow it. Covered in bee orchids and other lovely specialist plants. There's a big mound about the size of 2 tennis courts on the car park. So, you know, the wilderness of the nearby. You can find all these wonders if you have a searching mind. Let's get back to these glazes. There's another one there. We can play up the light on this. Get the final colour. If you missed how we got to here, you can still see it on my Facebook page, and it will be on YouTube. It's important probably to watch that if you really want to get the full guidance on how these paintings are put together. Watch the highlight go in again. Just on this curving area here. And we haven't finished yet up above. This is looking well. Remember I washed the shape in with a script liner brush. It gives you the control for these flowing lines. And having got the shape now, I can really play it up. So we can have a beautiful highlight. When these flower heads curve over with the weight of the flowers on the stem, you get this beautiful reflex curve. And just at that point of curvature, the sunlight always will, or if there is sunlight coming through, catch on here. A lovely little highlight there, throwing it out. And bluebells also, sometimes they go into this like a luminous yellowy green as they go towards the roots. We're winding this up soon, but I'd like to go a little bit longer. I'd just like to show you something here. I've been becoming interested in the stuff when I should have been interested in as a teenager. I've been listening to, over the last few years, to things like Led Zeppelin. But when I was 15 and 16, when they were all the rage, my rock stars were long dead Victorian artists. Like the Beatles to me, the pre-Raphaelites. There were young men at the academy schools, about 20 years old, and John Everett Millais painted this, the famous Ophelia. I dare say some of you are familiar with it. And every time I'm in London, I go and say hello to Ophelia. And Millais spent the summer months painting this background, and then the winter months painting Ophelia, and she was floating in a tin bath in the studio. There's all kinds of wonderful stories, but this was my inspiration for the type of painting we're doing now. This is so wonderfully done that you could actually teach a botany lesson in front of it. And his close friend, Holman Hunt, was a bit over the hill, you know. Millais was about 20 when he did Ophelia. Holman Hunt was an old man of 21 or 2, and he painted strayed sheep. And they were revolutionary in art and the style of painting. There was no formula here. It was all following Ruskin's advice to go to nature in singleness of heart. Holman Hunt, they influenced the French Impressionists, would you believe, in their colour. Impressionists coming 20 years later. Right, that's some good guidance there for painting bluebells, I hope. Let's go for a few minutes more. I'm sure you'll indulge me. Let's get back to the primrose. We can play up the light. On these petals. This is now back into opaque colour. Got a full studio tonight. We've got the crew on hand, and we're joined by Julie, my wife. It's getting a bit crowded in here. See, these were put back into shadow. So it's a case of contemplating how to bring the painting up to maximum effect. Poor old anemones didn't get much attention, but they need all of the same kind of focus as the rest of it. So these serrated leaves, we can glaze the core of them, glaze the detail on, glaze how some of them will curve back under the flowers, and some of them will sit back in the shadows under the bluebells. This is all great fun to do when you get some skills to hand and you can confidently tackle subjects. It's great fun just to put these descriptive paintings together, quite different to the New York City painting. This is all close attention and mimicking nature. But there's a lot more to it than that, really. It's all about design, and also you try to put some feeling into it. The better painters will always put something of themselves into the work. But it's enough at first just to learn the craft. And I'm trying to lead you through this. But I like to contemplate these, and I usually have some underlying themes in my head that I hope will come over. You're trying to resonate with people, shared experiences. Let's have another highlight on there. One of the elements to create power in the work is a good sense of design. It's not enough for me just to, for example, see something in the woods and then paint exactly as the Pre-Raphaelites did. I mean, they did put design into it, but I like to design the work to bring out the best. And not everything goes in. It's selective. It's somewhat abstract to create these forms. And if you look back on the first, do you remember when we put the roots in here? Zooming up to the apex. That's a pyramid composition. And I've got a picture here. I suddenly realised it's the pyramid or triangle composition. You see the roots leading up, and they're drawn up, and this is like stabilizing. The tree forces the eye up, and we're coming to rest on this focal point here. The most famous use of that design is Jericho, the raft of the Medusa. I don't know if you can see the similarity, but look at the rhythms in this. It's a painting of despair and desolation. And as it rises to the apex, there's a little bit of hope appears, and then glorious realization that they're to be rescued by the tiny ship on the horizon. It's counterbalanced by a second rectangle, but this is the primary. And my painting is pretty well similar to those rhythms. It's all about design. I think I'm enjoying that. I'd like to keep going. I'm conscious to keep these within manageable. I mean, you've got to get back to your wine, haven't you? But we'll be starting to glaze here and here. I think we'll take a look at this. I might just move this down, see if you can get the whole painting into shot. I'm not sure if our camera is low on power as well. A walk in the woods. A walk in the spring woods. I think there's work to be done on this, and I'll enjoy working it up and completing it. But I've taken you through as much as I can think of the staple methods I would use for such a piece of work. Thanks very much for joining us. And as long as this lockdown continues, I hope to be here on a Wednesday evening, competing with Mr. Myers. But thanks for your attention and company.